Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting. This is an IEP meeting for Adam. The topic of this meeting is a balance around the use of zero tolerance policies. We have a few individuals with us today. First, my name is Kelly Middleton, and I will be the moderator. And then secondly, we are joined by Julie, and she is our BCBA for our school district. And then Miss Emily, who is also a teacher. Today, we're going to discuss the topic about the efficacy and the use of zero tolerance within our school systems. Zero tolerance is a type of discipline procedure in schools that is a policy of punishing any infraction of a rule, regardless of accidental mistakes, ignorance, or extenuating circumstances. One approach is by removing the child that is a typical threat and that other people think it is a radical approach and that it has ethical concerns. We will be talking about the brief history of zero tolerance, the ethical implications, the pros and the cons, and alternative ways of working with students that misbehave. We would like to discuss the history about zero tolerance explained by Emily. Emily, would you like to start off with that for us today?
Sure. So it all began back in 1994 when the Guns Free School Act came in. According to the U.S. Department of Education, it stated that any school that had received federal funds required them to expel a child for at least a year. So that means if a student brought in such things as guns, explosives, or any other harmful things, they could be expelled. If the school didn't choose to follow this, then the school could potentially lose its funding. To each state receiving federal funds, now known as zero tolerance laws. Punishes the students for these infractions. So, for example, zero tolerance came more into the spotlight after the large school massacre of Columbine.
Okay, and now I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint and show a brief clip of what zero tolerance actually is. Emily, can you please explain to us why we use zero tolerance in school systems today?
Sure. So since the Guns Free School Act was implemented, as I stated earlier, back in 1994, schools started using zero tolerance. It helps provide a safe environment in schools and for the students. Once zero tolerance is implemented, it consequence for the actions of students misbehaving, such as expulsion or suspension or even detention. As seen across many school systems in our nation, we can see that there is a huge need for zero tolerance in our classrooms.
And you make an excellent point here. And today we're here to talk about Adam, who's a student in our school who's been displaying some behaviors. I'm going to be able to pull up the graphs in a few minutes, but Julie, can you go ahead and start to talk about Adam and tell us what we see from him?
Of course. So Adam can cause a lot of harm to other students, staff, and himself. There has to be an intervention that will work for this child. We need to just find the right one. We just need to ensure we're keeping everybody safe.
We want to use zero tolerance in our schools, mainly to ensure the safety of our students and our teachers. For example, when Adam is causing harm to himself, to staff, to students, it can be detrimental to his classmates, causing them not to learn or not stay on task or stay focused. This is unfair for his classmates, obviously, so especially because everyone's constantly interrupted and potentially in a harmful situation. As we know, there are so many instances of these throughout the schools in the United States that have since implemented zero tolerance. Especially when a student is hurting classmates or staff, a good consequence such as suspension is one way that our school and many other schools handle these situations.
So I'm going to now pull up the graphs for Adam. And Julie, can you please help explain what we're looking at, what we see here, and the different types of behaviors that we're seeing?
Of course I can do that. Let's look at physical aggression first. So as you can see by this graph, physical aggressions seem to be skyrocketing in every situation. And then if you look at property destruction, you see the same exact thing. It increases by the day. We have tried multiple strategies to decrease the frequency of these behaviors, but nothing has seemed to be working. Even though the data shows little to no progress regarding the behaviors, we need to keep Adam in school. Just because he's engaging in property destruction and aggression does not mean he should be separated from others. We just need to keep searching for an intervention that works. It's also important to mention that we will be in direct violation of the BCBA ethical codes if we discharge Adam. On the screen, we'll show the ethical codes that we're violating. Okay, so the first one we're going to go over is ethical code 1.40b, which states that behavior analysts do not implement contingencies that would cause others to engage in fraudulent, illegal, or unethical conduct. Also, we can look at 1.05d. In their work-related activities, behavior analysts do not engage in discrimination against individuals or groups based on their age, gender, race, culture, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, etc. Then we move on to 2.06. A behavior analyst has a primary obligation and take reasonable precautions to protect the confidentiality of those whom they work or consult, recognizing that confidentiality may be established by law, organizational rules, or professional or scientific relationships. 2.09 is a big one in this case, that clients have the right to effective treatment. Behavior analysts always have the obligation to advocate for and educate the client about scientifically supported and most effective treatment procedures. Effective treatment procedures have been validated and having both long-term and short-term benefits to the client and society. And then 3.01a is behavior analysts conduct current assessments prior to making recommendations or developing behavior change programs. The type of assessments used to determine by the client's needs and consent, environmental parameters, and other contextual variables. When behavior analysts are developing a behavior reduction program, they must first conduct a functional assessment. And then just a few more that we'd be violating is 3.01a is we need to conduct current assessments prior to making recommendations or developing behavior change programs. The type of assessment used is determined by the client's needs and consent, environmental parameters, and other contextual variables. When behavior analysts are developing a behavior reduction program, they must first do a functional analysis. 4.03a, behavior analysts must tailor behavior change programs to the unique behaviors, environmental variables, and assessment results and goals of each client. 4.07a, if environmental conditions prevent implementation of a behavior change program, behavior analysts recommend that other professional assistance may be sought. 4.0a, behavior analysts are recommended reinforcement rather than punishment whenever possible. And last but not least, 4.08c, before implementing punishment-based procedures, behavior analysts ensure that appropriate steps have been taken to implement reinforcement-based procedures unless the severity or dangerousness of the behavior necessitates immediate use of aversive procedures. As you can see, there are many ethical code violations that we are engaging in if we discharge Adam from school.
Some people see that alternative methods can help. Emily, can you please discuss the broken glass theory for us and what that contains?
Sure. So the theory is that communities must react to even minor disruptions in the social order with relatively strong force in order to send a message that certain behaviors will not be tolerated. Conversely, zero tolerance advocates belief that the failure to intervene in this way allows the cycle of disruption and violence to gain a solid hold in our schools and in our communities as well.
And now some people defend that it promotes a safe school zone with zero tolerance. And others disagree and think that it's unfair or unethical to a variety of individuals, especially individuals with special needs. Julie, can you please tell us a little more about the cons of zero tolerance and why it may not be a good choice?
Of course, I can elaborate on that. When we look at zero tolerance, there are no loopholes. People with disabilities are treated the same as typical peers. Unfortunately, statistics show that a lot of people with disabilities get in trouble in school. Zero tolerance puts a lot of emphasis on taking action when an undesired behavior emerges. One giant concern with people with disabilities is they do have a lot of undesired behaviors that may need intervention. But this does not mean that the school should jump straight to zero tolerance. We have come to learn that people with disabilities are the ones that get bullied the most. People with disabilities are a prime target for bullies since they're so different. Also, some people with disabilities are the ones that are being bullies due to the lack of observation of nonverbal social cues presented by others or just lack of general social skills. Some research states that zero tolerance does not even work. If you guys will direct your attention to the screen, there's a small clip that will talk about some research that discusses why zero tolerance does not work.
Sorry, guys, we had some technical difficulties with that, so I'm going to restart that for us.
So the video we just watched discussed how zero tolerance seems to do more harm than good. There also has been plenty of research that has been done to show that zero tolerance is not the answer. A study conducted by Shiba R talks about the broken window theory. This suggests that zero tolerance policies have dramatically increased the number of students put out of school for disciplinary purposes and may be accelerating students' contact with law enforcement. She goes on to also report that the data suggests that suspension, expulsion, and the increased use of law enforcement in school settings are themselves risk factors for the range of negative academic and life outcomes.
But now some individuals see zero tolerance as a profound approach of how many schools discipline their students. Julie, what do you have to say to that?
This form of discipline is not effective. Another study conducted by Wilson states that the definition of zero tolerance refers to strict, uncompromising, automatic punishment to eliminate undesirable behaviors. When applied to schools, the zero tolerance mentality totally contradicts the principle of zero reject, which underlies U.S. special education laws. Suspension and expulsions are exclusionary disciplines policy, which removes the student from normal education opportunities because of the rule infraction, which is completely unethical, and the students lose the opportunities to learn.
By doing zero tolerance, it can be seen as setting the student up for failure or a negative education. That's what I'm getting from you, Julie. And this is where we see the school to prison pipeline. Can you please explain the school to prison pipeline and what that means?
The school to prison pipeline is an idea that people who have trouble in the school system will most likely have trouble in the justice system later down the road. In the PowerPoint presentation, there's an excellent video that explains the school to prison pipeline.
Yes, I will pull that up now. Give me 1 second to switch over. Julie, I'm also going to pull up a representation that we see that kind of takes the video that we did, but it puts it in a visual. Can you explain that for me?
Yes, I can. So this is a really good representation of our children being pushed into prison. So each side shows from school to prison, and then another one shows from foster care to prisons. And as you can see by this data, it's pretty significant. For example, the 40% of students expelled from U.S. schools each year are of African American descent. 70% of the students involved in in-school arrests or referred to law enforcement are African American or Latino. And then also, Black students are 3.5 times more likely to be suspended than whites. And also, Black and Latino students are twice as likely to not graduate high school as whites. And then in the end, 68% of all males in state and federal prisons do not have a high school diploma. So it really shows like a really pure correlation between having trouble in school and also leading into trouble later on in the justice system. And you can even see that from foster care to prison as well. So for example, the 50% of children in foster care systems are African American or Latino, and 30% of foster care youth entering the juvenile justice system are placement related to behavior cases. And we all know Adam is definitely one of them that has his behavioral issues. So Adam is just as likely to get tossed into these systems if we end up suspending or expelling him from school.
Emily, do you have anything else that you would like to add to this?
Yes, actually, for example, from the video we just saw before, we learned that in Oakland, California, a school system had tried something different, something new, and they called this restorative justice. And this is a little different take on working with children, especially when they have different things between each other or arguments. It is used by talking it out with different guidance counselors or just counselors between the two individuals or more, instead of a punishment. They found that this was actually somewhat more successful, and it helped lead to less detentions, less suspensions, and that all went down. And then obviously due to that, attendance went up, which is hopefully something that could be a good alternative.
There is also a lot more research that proves that zero tolerance is not the answer. Lozinski et al. Reported that zero tolerance approach could be coupled with preventative measures and alternative exclusionary practices to have the potential of both addressing safety in school and protecting the rights of individual students. They also suggest that zero tolerance policies should be continually evaluated for their effectiveness of certain students and the criteria that warrants the zero tolerance policies. Effective preventative measures reported include PBIS, bullying prevention, and targeted early intervention programs such as the first step to success. Furthermore, the effects of the alternative responses such as threat assessment appear promising. When we look at the Ethical Code 4.08, it states that behavior analysts recommend reinforcement rather than punishment whenever possible. So we need to make sure that we're doing this for Adam as well.
After discussing with each other the pros and cons about zero tolerance that's implemented in our school system, where do we stand now? Adam falls into this case where he is also of a different ethnic background, and he has a disability as well, and so we see that this data, it stacks up against him. So is there anything different that we want to do that will work for these students?
Well, according to an article from the University of Virginia, it states that the authoritative discipline theory is another alternative that can be used in place of zero tolerance. This article, it also states that according to a substantial amount of research, it has shown that positive adolescent development really depends on adult relationships with child and parents. They stated also that the authoritative discipline theory, Gregory and Cornell, 2009, that neither structure nor support alone is sufficient to maintain a safe and orderly school climate. In contrast, an authoritative approach with both support has an optimal impact on school safety. So this means that it correlates in a student and a teacher environment as well. So what I learned is in this article, research also shows that adolescents benefit from teachers who use a very similar approach to authoritative parental guidance. That from an article from Gregory and Weinstein, it showed that African American students with negative discipline trajectories had greater acceptance of the authority of teachers with them who they perceived as caring and maintaining a high academic expectation.
So in correlation to that, can you also explain what the school-wide positive behavior support is and why some schools use this as an option?
Yeah, so according to that, the school-wide positive behavior support characterized as the integration of valued outcomes, behavioral and biomedical science, empirically validated procedures, and systems to enhance the quality of life and minimize or prevent problem behaviors. In the Carr and Sagai article, they also stated that the foundation for school-wide positive behavior supports lie in the application of these features to the whole school context in an effort to prevent as well as change patterns of problem behavior. They suggested that school-wide positive behavior supports are rooted in an applied behavior analytic tradition, which was a solid body of research, in which they focused is on behavior of the individual and the environment around that's being observed. So ultimately, this would be something positive, more so as another alternative for Adam.
So once again, I'm going to state Ethical Code 4.08 because it's a very important one for this case. That it states that behavior analysts really recommend reinforcement rather than punishment whenever possible. So in Adam's case, we need to ensure that we exhaust all of our reinforcement strategies that we have before we even consider using the zero tolerance policy against Adam.
And then under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, schools are required by law to use the functional behavior assessment when dealing with challenging behaviors with students with special needs. Earlier, whenever you were reviewing the ethical guidelines, Julie, you discussed this. You talked about the need for the functional behavior assessment. I think that it would be a good option for us to move towards. We can then evaluate whether or not we should use a different reinforcement system. Julie, do you think that you can get this scheduled for us so we can really find out the concrete function of both of these behaviors for him?
I definitely think we can do that. And if we really figure out the function of behavior, I'm sure we can make a really positive impact on Adam's life.
That would be great.
Perfect. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us today in our meeting regarding Adam and zero tolerance. We'll have Julie come in and we'll conduct the FBA to determine the function of Adam's behaviors, physical aggression, and property destruction. Once this is completed, we will meet again and review the data to determine a decision regarding Adam's placement in the school. I'm so thankful that both of you provided so much more information in regards to the pros and cons of zero tolerance. Does anyone else have anything to add?
I think we are all set.
Thank you. I'm good.
Okay. Thank you both so much. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You guys too. Bye-bye.
Bye.